African governments are reviewing the risk of too much dependence on China after years of lending and investments in the continent that has shored up loans to billions of dollars. After years of borrowing on easy terms, many African countries are believed to be in a debt crisis fueled by the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, joining me now to discuss this issue is the practice lead SSA at Docker Frontier London, William Atwell. Good afternoon, William. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Hello.
Now, let's begin our conversation with Zambia's public debt to GDP, which is heading towards 100% of GDP this year. And like many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, is at a rising risk of debt distress. What role have Chinese loans played in getting us to this point?
Yeah, you're certainly correct to point out the very high debt loads that Zambia is now encountering, and we know that President Lungu of Zambia has been in touch with the Chinese president in an attempt to try and seek some debt forgiveness or even debt cancellation. So the approach that China is taking here is certainly not one of a blanket debt forgiveness or amnesty program. It's really dealing with African countries on a one-to-one and a case-by-case basis. So there isn't one single approach that they're taking. We know, though, that the challenge of Chinese debt is very significant, and it's certainly been building up over the past several years. Academics at Johns Hopkins University in the US have estimated that it's well over $140 billion in terms of loans that China's lent to Africa. But of course, it's very difficult to quantify that because many of these loans have been lent in a context of quite a lot of opacity. So getting clarity on exactly the details is difficult. But we know that for many SSA markets, China is by far the largest creditor, and that Chinese debt is going to pose a major challenge to public finances going forward.
But what are the chances that China will provide African countries with debt relief or forgiveness, and what forms could this take?
So as I mentioned, it's really going on a case-by-case basis. There won't be one model. We know that Zambia, for instance, has approached China in an attempt to ask for some debt forgiveness on certain loans. Other markets are adopting different negotiating strategies. So Angola, for instance, has been trying to renegotiate its oil for revenue kind of deals that it has with China. Others are seeking for deferments on some of the debt repayments as well. So there are a number of different approaches that could be taken. What we don't think is that China is going to provide a big, generous debt forgiveness scheme. So that's very unlikely.
Well, would there be any evidence that China's relationship with Africa may look different after the COVID-19 downturn?
It certainly will. On the one hand, we find that the US is to some extent playing catch up with China in terms of its relationship to Africa, in its relationship to business in Africa. So we know that actually one of the largest loans that's been announced recently has come from the US Exim Bank, which is going to that very large liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique. So that's one of the largest projects on the continent right now, and that's being funded with US money. So there is, of course, a rising role of the US in terms of the business environment. But I think the general theme that's going to cover Africa-China relations going forward is going to be a lot more caution on the part of African governments. We know Kenya, for instance, has been investigating the terms of that standard gauge railway project, which is one of the biggest mega infrastructure projects in East Africa. And really, the court has actually found against that project. They found that there are irregularities there. So there's going to be a lot more caution and a lot more scrutiny of how these loans come about, because I think African governments have realized that just taking on too much Chinese debt is ultimately going to be against their interests in the longer term.